welcome on in, everybody. Today we are doing an interview with a person that I actually met through Pyro's community. And we're just going to be talking a little bit about mental health and sort of seeing where that goes. So, first of all, I haven't actually asked this yet. What would you like me to call you today?
That is a good question. So you can call me either Dr. Close Enough, Close, any type of variation. I do have he/him pronouns,
Okay.
so even that works too.
Okay, cool. And any preference from any of those?
I think most people would you know what, if since we met through Pyro stream, you can always go with a
Doctor,
doctor or
doctor,
doctor
doctor,
doctor
doctor,
doctor doctor
doctor,
doctor
doctor,
doctor
doctor.
doctor and yep.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So my name is Sean or Tech. Either one is totally fine. Could you just, like tell us a little bit about yourself, like plug anything that you want to plug, just like give a little intro?
Sure. Well, hello all out there. Dr. Close Enough, or actually I should have said too, my first real name is David, which is fine. I have no problem saying that one either. That one works too.
Cool.
Let's see. So yeah, stream Monday, Wednesday, Friday between work and everything, and it's also a great way for me to at least to relax with the chaos that is life and my schedule. Work, married. My parents live with us part-time when they're not out exploring the country. It's wintertime, so they won't go in their RV because it's not very insulated, so they're here. 4 dogs. And I am always busy doing something, what have you, since I love working with my hands.
Cool.
And that's all I can really think of off the top of my head. I'm sure there'll be more stuff later. It's like, oh yeah, I didn't mention this, but
Cool.
for right now, yeah.
Sounds great. All right. So, just some heads up for people in chat today. Alerts are all paused, so know that. And then the second thing is that unlike the Pyro interview, we're going to be starting out interacting with chat. So, like as Doctor and I talk about stuff today, if y'all have anything, like any thoughts or questions or things to contribute, we will sort of like be peeking over at chat and sort of like incorporating it into the conversation. So yeah, so hi, is it Roxy?
I'm not too sure. I thought, like, no, maybe someone from your community.
Cool.
Like, oh, well, hello there.
Cool. Anyway, Roxy Fox, welcome on in. Roxy, please let me know if I'm slaughtering the pronunciation of your name. So, and then in terms of like the type of conversation that we're gonna have, Doctor and I talked about it a few times, and we decided we're just gonna sort of see where it goes. So it'll be sort of like mental health focused, but we'll just sort of figure out how exactly we're gonna approach that. So, my intention, Doctor, like I said in our DMs, is very much to sort of like have you lead, and then I'll just sort of like supplement. So, what would you like to talk about today?
Well, that's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, oops, as I bumped my mic. I can say that for me, my experience with mental health is obviously not going to be as, I have my own personal experiences, but I would always say like in my field, like, oh, I defer to the expert. Obviously that's not my line of expertise because I do for my real job I work within, well, not currently, public health higher education, specifically with doctors and residents, interns, that sort of thing, and plus everybody else that works there. So I do have some experiences with it, but I'm not too sure where to start with. Maybe I can list my own mental health.
Yeah, that's sort of what I had noted from what you said, is that you talked about having your own experiences with mental health. What does that kind of look like for you?
So for me, my mental health, it always amazes me at how so many what seems like little things can impact your own mental health. Like for instance, when I took this position, we actually moved here from the other side of the country. We were West Coast, now we're East Coast. And my spouse, husband, partner, again, whatever terminology you like to use.
Sure.
What
What terminology do you like to use?
I always just say husband.
Okay.
Yeah, I just always say husband, so it just makes it easier.
Cool.
For me. But he was in a severe car accident.
Oh no.
Jaws of life, ICU stay, couple emergency surgeries, and everything else, and he lived, still with us. About 95% of where he was. It's been 2 years, and multiple surgeries and everything else.
Wow.
Yeah. So he just actually finished what should be his last surgery on Halloween of all days. I was like, why Halloween? But Halloween.
That is scary.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm not superstitious, but it's just like, the timing is weird, but I'm not going to question it. So, but I remember it was in October 2020. If you want to actually know, it's October 17, 2020, 6:34 p.m. because I'll never forget. He so by the time he actually got released, it was his first day. Let's say I think it was the first full day because I was able to bring him home in that late afternoon. So it was the next day, and I got the phone call and was offered the job here on this side of the country.
Wow.
So, and then of course, with it being COVID, a lot of things fell through the cracks very quickly in every area of the field. But within healthcare, the wound nurse never showed up. And a couple other people of health aides never showed up. And I'm very grateful that I have expertise on aseptic technique, making sure infection control. Trying to think of a better word for that, but infection control and dressing wounds and that sort of thing. So it wasn't too bad for me because I was able to at least do that for him. But so I was his nurse. I was handling packing, moving, working with the insurances still and everything else. And so that was very, very challenging. And it's also why I gained a bunch of weight that I'm still trying to work off, because if you don't have any other time other than sleep, literally from the time you open your eyes to when you can close them, my coping mechanism was food. So, but anyway, when he moved in with my parents that lived over there and still had a house at the time. And I borrowed their trailer and I moved down here, and I at least had one of my dogs with me, but it was that isolation. Even throughout COVID, I've always had my husband, and so we had each other at least. And when it came to being on my own, even though I at least had my pup there for comfort, it probably was within a month and a half of just a constant sense of dread and just anxiety of everything, and trying to just deal with it. And then it was just like, this needs to stop. And so thankfully I for me personally, try to take as little medication as possible. And so, but I did end up taking some scripts. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. One of the standard,
like anxiety medications. Oh, antidepressants.
Anxiety
gotcha.
and antidepressants. Yeah, it was both of them.
Gotcha.
So what really helped with is that my husband was finally cleared for travel. Maybe like a little bit after Christmas, so like February 20, 21. And even though it wasn't ideal, because it was still a very small trailer, like I literally could if I stuck out my arms, I could touch the bed and the bathroom.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was tiny. So he with him, it was he moved in. Moved over, and we didn't really have much, but it was just, for both our mental states, it was just good to have each other again. So I can imagine, especially during COVID, with those that, we're still technically in COVID, but when there was a lot more restrictions, being alone. It's just, I can imagine there was a huge spike in mental health crises and crises. Crises is a plural, but and yeah. And besides that, then of course, growing up, coming to terms with my own sexuality was, I what was it? Just was talking to a friend Thursday night, and he said like, oh, if you are any type of neurodivergent or not heteronormative, you do not make it through without some form of anxiety and mental health issues that you get yourself through either one way or another. So it's
For
like,
sure. Wow.
um,
So I think
yeah.
that there's sort of like two paths that I hear from what you talked about that we could go down, and I'd like to know like which one sounds good to you. So either we could sort of dig into like the emotional roller coaster that it sounds like, the big surgery for your husband, and then the getting the new job and sort of everything that came from that. Or we could talk about sort of, like the journey of coming to terms with your sexuality. Do you have a preference of which one to, or like which one would you like to start with?
Let's see. The only reason I would suggest the one with um for the more recent one
Hmm.
with my husband and everything, and the only reason for that one is because it's relatively fresh.
Sure.
I I came to terms with my sexuality in my teens, and I'm 34 right now,
For
so
sure.
you know I came to terms. I'm good with
Cool.
it now. Um, so I think with that one, it would be more of me like trying to be like and thinking, like trying to remember like what was it specifically.
Yeah,
And then I'm
sure.
sure there's a couple other times in my mind as well where there were bouts, experience, acute, acute anxiety and acute mental health issues to get over. Um, yeah.
Sure. So with the hubby surgery and then getting the new job and all of that, is it okay if I just sort of like uh make sure that I understood everything that you talked about?
Sure, absolutely, please.
Okay. So what I got was, first of all, terrifying car accident occurs. Husband has to go through all sorts of surgeries, has to like be like saved from the car, like just very, very severe accident. And this like last surgery comes up where it's like, okay, like we're finally gonna like get out of the dark. And then as soon as that happens, there's this whole new like huge thing that comes up of like, well, I have a new job opportunity, so we have to move across the country. And then to make that even more overwhelming and worse, then it was like, oh, lots of people are not showing up to take care of my husband in the way that he needs to be taken care of. And so simultaneously, while trying to move across the country, get everything ready to move across the country, you're also having to like take care of your husband in the way that like a medical professional would.
Yes. Yeah, because the first ones, the first surgeries though, they were the emergency surgeries, and then you still had more later on. But yeah, that about summarizes it all.
And
So
then
yeah.
and
Mhm.
and and then so during that time you talked about sort of like using food as a coping mechanism, and then there was one part where you decided to sort of like move across the country in a trailer without your husband because he couldn't travel.
Correct.
And so then you were in this tiny little trailer and just like completely isolated and filled with dread, you talked about, because you were
Hmm.
sort of all alone and had nobody there. And then eventually hubby got cleared for travel and you two moved into that trailer together.
Yep.
Wow. And you talked about how tiny that trailer was. It was still like how was it living in that tiny trailer together?
I'm just very, very grateful that neither of us have claustrophobia.
Sure, sure.
I mean, there was at least enough space. I should rephrase that as that, I don't think anyone is very comfortable if they have like maybe a 1 foot by 1 foot amount of space to stand in, and then there's nothing else to move. I would be freaking out myself.
Yeah.
And it was certainly challenging, but it was nice to be that close, because then there was also, when I was able to come back home, since I did go physically into work, it would be nice to come on back, and it kind of forced you to cuddle and to talk, and you have a physically close proximity. You can't avoid any subjects that might be irritating you, because you can see them right there.
Yeah.
So
a forced intimacy almost.
Yeah, and yeah, I would be anxious all the time about a lack of space from just I was reading like, oh yeah, absolutely. Like that one, the only reason it happened is just because it's like we had the money from selling our house, but we needed to first figure out what is the area like, where are we trying to move to, and that sort of thing. And it also apparently when we moved was right at the very start of the peak of a housing shortage crisis in the area. So like, if you didn't bid high within the first 5 hours of a house being on the market, you didn't get it.
Yeah, it was a seller's market all the way, where like houses were just getting snatched up left and right, and like people were selling houses way over the market price.
Yep. Oh
For
yeah.
Sure.
But going back to the small house, the small trailer, I also felt bad. I still, to this day, feel a sense of guilt, because the only reason that well, not the only reason, one of the reasons that he moved out to there when he had, a lot more space, obviously, at my parents' house, and at least when my parents would go out, and, he was able to go places, because he also wasn't cleared to drive until, I want to say, May of 2021. But so obviously, if I'm not there and there's nobody else there, it's not like he could really go anywhere, and he still would get tired very easily. Because they did open him up from pubis to sternum, so like just right above the pubic bone to just right below where you can feel on their lungs there, and chest, and so obviously it took him a long time to heal.
Yeah.
And so I always felt guilty that it's like I took him away from there just because I really needed it for my own mental health, in order to be able to deal with everything that was going on, even if it was not exactly the most ideal situation. But at the same time, I know that he also, of course, really missed me, and so I think that's one of the reasons I know that he moved in was because I did ask, like, hey, would you be willing to?
Yeah.
But then the other one is like, it would be nice, even though it's not an ideal situation, it would be nice to at least be there.
For sure. Oop. Yeah, it sounds really, really brutal to sort of like, I don't know, on the one hand have this dread of being alone, and like I think that a lot of what I'm getting from what you're talking about is sort of the profound effect, the profoundly negative effect that sort of like COVID had on your life. And then like on the other end, when you try to like do something for yourself in order to alleviate that there's this feeling of guilt because you're sort of like inconveniencing someone else.
Pretty much. I mean, it's kind of why I've been in the healthcare field, or even went into the healthcare field, is just because I've always had that sense of, I know it's not always the best to think it this way, completely understand that, but still, of, like servant leadership sort of way, and we're, I'm here to help, and so try to help, and then anything of where I'm trying to help myself makes me feel guilty, even though logistically I still would make that decision again. I would make that same decision I did before, because I can't help others if I'm not in a place to help others. So,
Totally. Yeah. So
so I mean that.
I'm sort of curious about this. I'm starting to get a sense that like you have big caretaker vibes, Doctor.
Yes,
And
I.
go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say that's. I am very very grateful to have, and I will use the term partner for this one because it is more of a much more of a partnership of like scheduling myself to the point of it was just last Tuesday I scheduled myself to exhaustion.
Hmm.
Like I thought I was getting sick and I crashed and it's like no, it turns out no, I scheduled myself to the point of exhaustion. And husband was like, was there to point out the obvious to me. Like, you're overscheduling again. Like, oh, you're right. Let me take a couple things out.
For sure.
So it's nice to have that little bit of a balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I was just reading real quick.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I'm the opposite. I prefer smaller spaces because it makes it easier not to clutter. I have a hoarding tendency because of trauma, also agoraphobic, so a small space feels safer. Makes sense. Makes sense. And then understandable, I get the whole comfy vibes of smaller places and the lack of opportunity to hoard. For me, it's because I'm a big guy, so I'm already hyper aware of space around me. Being a small place kicks that into overdrive. Mm. It's cool.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say no. I totally understand that as well because our house, we could have gotten a bigger house, even with the craziness. But I really want to maintain a little bit of a smaller house because then it's also easier to not clutter. Because that's also one that wants husband always wants to go out and be like, oh, this is cute. It's like, okay, great. Where would you put it? We'll find. No. Where are you going to put it? Find it. If you can tell me where you're going to put it, then sure, we'll get it. And it's like, oh, I guess we don't have the space. Exactly. So it's nice with a little bit smaller space to be like, you don't accumulate extra stuff.
Totally. Yeah, it sounds like you two do a good job of holding each other accountable.
Generally speaking, absolutely. It while the accident was absolutely horrible, the fact that we still remain strong, able to help each other and continue to it also of all things led to a lot more open conversations that I don't think we would have had unless this horrible thing that happened.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. The analogy that sort of comes to mind when you talk about that is like I've heard a lot of stories of that like when people get cancer, even though getting cancer is a horrible, horrible thing to happen, that a lot of the time it sort of is like a almost like a wake up call that uh, gives them sort of an impetus to get closer to and like say the things that they need to say to the people that they really love and care about. And it sounds like with such a sort of like huge horrendous event, it also sort of brought you two closer together.
yes, it really did. And I mean, if nothing else, I am yes, I agree with Fox's saying a catalyst.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely. That is a good word for it because it it wasn't necessarily things that were unsaid. It's just things I didn't think to discuss.
Sure.
And I believe to say it is okay on because it also involves sexuality, and I'm assuming
That is
that's okay. I just want to make sure where the boundary is for
all good.
anything.
All good.
Uh, Perfect. Well, and just in terms of obviously there was no there was intimacy, but not sex.
Sure.
Can't your body's still healing for months and months, and so it even led to a discussion of like, oh well, how do you feel about not? I mean, what surprised me was he brought up of like, what if you know there's not like a hall pass of just of opening, or how would you feel about this, how do you feel about this, are you I want to make sure that he tells me you want to make sure you're feeling satisfied, or and that's and it always amazed me to because I never really thought about having that conversation. I didn't even think about it at the time either, because again my focus was on him and new job because we discussed it once it was in the trailer. And it just like I said, I never would have thought we would have had those conversations, and just it never really came to mind that we would have. So it acted as a catalyst for a lot of different things.
For sure. Yeah, Doctor, I really appreciate talking with you because you provide very rich tapestry and give us like a lot of options and directions to go in. So I'm gonna provide another couple of paths, and you just let me know which one you'd like to go down. The first one is this sort of like, caretaker. It sounds like sometimes almost to a fault, and talking about sort of like where that comes from, what that's like for you. And the other path is I just really sort of admire the way that it sounds like you and your partner have navigated your relationship, and sort of talking a little bit about the like intricacies of that and what that's been like. Which one would you like to go down?
I honestly don't have a preference, and I don't have an instinct of going one way or another. So I'm fine with either. I was even looking around right now. I'm like, do I have a coin to flip?
That's really funny.
Just to bring it down to that. But damn it, no, I don't. I agree. By the way, or just is it prom or just prom or? Just...
I usually call them prom. You can call them whatever you want though.
All right, sorry, prom. I just wanted to make sure to verbalize and say absolutely. I 100% agree that yeah, even when he was healing, he was still thinking of me, and it was nice to be able to experience that at the same time as think of him, and it was really prom is 100%. Thank you, perfect. People's response to trauma often reveal things they never ventured to outright say. That yeah, I would not really. I don't feel like I'd be able to fully understand that if I had not experienced it.
For sure. Yeah. Well, now I'm trying to think. Caretaker or navigating your relationship? Chat, do you have
Either one is on the table, so...
do you have any preference, chat?
Oh, yeah. If not, I think I can pull up I have a API to roll a physical, well, a digital D20 across screen, but...
For sure.
Let's see. Because... all right, let's see. Here we go. So let's say 10 and lower is the first option, 11 and higher will be the second option.
Sounds good.
13, second option. Okay. Unless chat said anything in the meantime.
Sounds good. So,
okay.
In terms of navigating your relationship, it sounds like your partner sort of offered to at least somewhat like open up the relationship during that time.
Yeah.
Did that end up happening?
Yes, it's actually still happening now. In terms of obviously a set of ground rules, and especially early on, of constantly checking in to see how do you feel? Like, has anything changed? For me, with having ADHD, I have to have my lists. I have to have my list, my event calendar, everything else, so on and so forth, a bunch of other tricks to keep my line of thought going so I can actually get stuff done. But my goodness. So I wrote down, and we have a accessible file that we both can always see, and just figure out what are our boundaries, what are our rules. What is the hard stop, that's those sort of situations. And it was great. And I mean, it's not like it's really happened that often. I could probably count on one hand, but it's still, it's just a way of mutual respect, boundaries, and discussions and everything else. And like I said, it's still, I think, because again, have to write it down. I think it's actually on my calendar for some time next month for the bi-monthly, every 2 months to review. The rules still the same. We're still feeling good.
That's really awesome. Changed? Yeah. So I'm really hearing from you that one, there is just sort of a very a big focus on like respecting each other's boundaries, and then the way in which you sort of do that is by one, having regular check-ins, and two, I'm also hearing this sort of like y'all actually will utilize like alternate forms of communication rather than just speaking to one another. You also have like a document that you can both access and sort of check in on, and it sounds like that makes the process go a little bit smoother.
Yep, agreed. And that's legitimately where it stands of like, okay, as because the first rule is either of us do not feel comfortable for whatever reason, then it automatically closes everything else down.
You have veto
Well,
power.
yeah, exactly. It's veto if necessary, just automatic close relationship again. That's it, that's fine, and we're just going to focus on us, and that is rule number one, and we still have that.
Cool.
And yeah, so I mean, it is a good process, and thank you, Fox, by the way. And yeah, that's exactly what it is just a matter of discussing. And it's as long as we maintain an open communication, because of course it wasn't just okay, here we go, jump right in. It was like nothing was acted on for like months, even after we established rules, because fine, I also had like freaking no time, but
Yeah.
even if I wanted to, but it was just nice to still check on him. Yeah, a weekly checkup to give each other a chance to talk about things in general. I agree, Mr. Mushroom. Thank you for stopping on in, by the way. He's an awesome guy.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, it's cool because, like I feel like every like, Instagram guru always says like the key to any relationship is communication. And it's cool to hear that goes double for open relationships.
The other thing that's funny about that is it always makes me chuckle because there is open communication. That's a quite a big term because nobody's communication methodology is the same as the other. And that has always probably been the biggest thing, is even though, yes, now we have open conversations, open discussions and everything, it took years to be able to get to that, to figure out, okay, for instance, I'm right now I'm looking at the camera, but trying to make sure I'm like, so for your interpretation, if you look at the screen, I'm looking in your eyes. For me, open communication is I need to look at you in the eyes, and I need to be able, I'm going to say whatever, and I need to focus on your eyes so I can listen in and interpret what you're saying and make sure I understand and blah, blah, blah. Don't talk while you're still finishing your sentence to make sure that I fully process, so on and so forth, a bunch of other stuff. Husband, he can't look at you. He has to be looking at something else. Even if like the phone, like legitimately his phone is off, just be off, he'll just be looking. And he'll still be talking, but he cannot look at you because to him, it makes him nervous. He starts getting nervous laughter and everything else. And then especially some people, you hear laughter and you think they're laughing at you, and which obviously not happening. So it's just finding a way to blend those two styles was not easy, but
yeah, that finding the balance between both of y'all's communication styles is a task all on its own. That like it's not like you can just openly communicate. You have to figure out what open communication looks like for each of you individually, and then figure out how to find sort of like a compromise or a middle ground between the two of those.
Yeah, exactly. And Fox, no, actually, he isn't autistic, but he also had a difficult childhood for many years. So I wouldn't be surprised if there. I believe what we brought it down to is also childhood trauma, because one of his stepfather that he would live with off and on because going back and forth and everything, but that's his story to tell. Just the background of it is you do not look at the parental figure, or specifically his stepdad, in the eye unless you want to get beat.
For sure.
So I think that's why too, like to this day, why he can't look at you in the eye if he's talking about something serious. So
yeah,
which is, it took also a few years to figure to realize that's what the issue was as well.
Yeah.
But well, not issue. That's not the right term. What his comfort style was to make it make an appropriate blend.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That it took a while to figure out, like, hey, it seems like there's this big difference between us. what is it that is sort of causing this big difference? And it sounds like that for him, the reason that he wasn't as comfortable sort of, looking in the eye and things like that is because that's sort of like what he was taught was correct when he was little.
Yep.
Makes a lot of sense.
And sorry, I went off on a tangent there, but bringing myself back to...
You're all good.
Yeah, I think actually I pretty much have said everything I can think of off the top of my head, unless you want to navigate back to what we were originally discussing, or a discussion before that, or to continue on the line of thinking.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure.
So that's sort of where my mind was too. That honestly, it sounds like your relationship is incredibly solid. Like it sounds like you both do a really, really good job of sort of, like compromising, communicating, and sort of like figuring out where each other are coming from and what each other need.
Yep. And that's not to say, of course, there are still obviously arguments, but at least it's nice to be able to get over those. I mean, we just had one today because I put a cord away in the wrong spot, apparently. So little things like that, like, okay.
Sure. And so then I think that what sort of comes to mind for me is navigating back to the path that we did not take of this sort of like caretaker path. That like,
sure.
And so I'm sort of curious with that, where does that sort of come from for you?
When I was thinking back on it, the best I can think of is going back to childhood. My parents are obviously, they live with us. We have a great relationship, and I've had a great relationship back then too. I know teenage years are probably iffy, but that's pretty much every teenager's. But when I was a kid, my parents, what they would do is, so I told you this, Tech, and Mushroom knows, but for everybody else, what we're sitting in right now is an office I built. It was a shed, and I, converted it out of door, windows, insulation, electricity, ran electricity out, did the floors, everything. I did it all. And so, how I even know how to do that is growing up, my parents would buy houses, live in them for, a couple of years, like 2 to 5 years. Excuse me, need to actually need to burp of all things. Sorry, I can mute myself very quickly.
You're all good. You're all good.
So they would flip houses and sell them, and then we would move someplace else. And it always seemed to be that we would move into a different school district. So basically, it's like every 2 to 5 years, I'd restart with making friends and that sort of thing. And it wasn't like it was that far away. It was a different school district. So then when you're a kid, you can't drive yourself, and especially if you don't live in the same neighborhood, you can't ride your bike out all the way out there and go from that. And it was challenging. So bright side, I learned the skills to be able to build what I have and do all the reno projects myself and all the good stuff, save a bunch of money, and get it. I also feel a sense of accomplishment being able to get the end product. But at the same time, I learned to be more personable, engaging, to be kind, and then at a detriment to myself, unfortunately, at the time, to be that person that is always helping. Because that's how I could make friends the fastest. Was like to try to help. And then and of course, as a kid, I didn't really be able to set those boundaries or even really understand what those boundaries were. So it wasn't until I was in my teens that I figured out, like, okay, no, I need to set a boundary of this, this, and this. And even to this day, still sometimes, again, having a spouse that's my husband able to tell me, like, no. Just like I'll say something, and you're like, well, maybe I can. He's like, no, he's not. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I probably should. I don't know when I'd be able to fit the time in, but I could try. No. Okay.
Yeah.
So That works, but because of that, that is my best guess, and you know, thinking introspectively what I experienced. And so I just kind of took that and kept working with it. And then I think also my father um was, besides his regular job and then also remodeling the house and keeping our cars, because he used to own his own auto mechanic shop. He's a jack of all trades. He was also an EMT. So I think that also introduced me into the health sector of it, and learning some of the stuff as he went on, just because I've always been really, really curious. And yeah, so just from that.
For sure.
My wife does that for me as well. A green mushroom, yeah. It's like sometimes it more often than not for me, it's good. You know, since I sometimes will have trouble setting boundaries, so he'll help.
Yeah, I think that
and
that is one of the best things about a partnership is that they can reel you in when you need to.
yes, agreed. And thank you, Prom. By the way, I very much appreciate it. It took many, many months since I did it myself, but it finally got here. So.
For sure. Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense to me, Doctor, that like you were sort of moving around constantly when you were a kid, and because of that, you had to constantly restart when it came to connections. And so the way that you figured out how to make connections the fastest was to sort of like please others. And that has stuck with you all the way to now.
Yep.
And so go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I can at least say that it's been nice to be able to establish boundaries, but even it still surprises me. You know, sometimes you'll say something and you surprise even yourself, like, oh wow, I actually said that. You know, like not necessarily like in a bad way, like, oh wow, I don't think I'd be like, there's no way I'd be able to do that again, or you know, maybe that's what you think, or at least what I would think.
Yeah, that like when you
so
set a boundary, you'll like you'll surprise yourself that you're like, oh dang, I actually stood up for myself.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. Because more often than not, it's more like maybe going back and forth, or again, if husband is there, then do the hard boundary. But still, it's just like okay. But yeah,
For
it's like,
sure.
oh dang. And so that was just I was just thinking of a work incident like last month of all things. It was like where I was still finding myself surprised, like, oh, I set a boundary. Okay, good, but surprised.
Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like it's still a very sort of like new exploration that you're going through.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, I could say that.
And so I'm curious. Oh, and Prom had said it's one of my big flaws too. I have such a hard time saying no. I'm a people pleaser, and my boundaries are hard to enforce. Yeah, so I think that this transitions very nicely into this question that I had for you, Doctor, which is like, how does in terms of pleasing people in order to sort of like form relationships, how does that affect sort of like how you feel about yourself as a person?
Don't know off the top of my head. I think it's and similar to Prom, like with the having trouble saying no. Those are that's internalized. That's a reaction. Or just standard action. Sorry, just use D&D tolerance, but
you can use any form of communication that you want here, as long as I can understand it.
Yes, I was gonna say worst case scenario. If I go into some weird D&D, it's like at least Mr. Mushrooms here. He might be able to be like
translate.
Yeah, translate. Since right after this, I have his game actually, his Dungeons and Dragons game.
That's awesome.
I find the same problem. Also, people pleaser. Yeah. Agreed, Mr. Mushroom. And I'm trying to think. I can honestly answer that I don't know how to answer that.
Okay. Let me ask an alternative question, okay?
Sure.
When you say no, what comes up?
Mixture of emotions, because I'm trying to think of like the last time I said no, other than just being surprised. Uh,
Yeah, examples are great because they provide like raw data, so to speak.
yes. And if I had to summarize it, first instinct or first experienced emotion is fear.
What are you
If
afraid
I
of?
had to boil it down, and it's always something that always have to freaking focus. Um. Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Mushroom. Sorry. Sidebar. So hey, bright side. I can also stick around for stream afterwards.
Awesome.
um. All right. So anyway, fear because my if I had to, I'm still trying to figure out the word. It's always difficult expressing, translating emotions to words.
Yeah. Feel free to take as much time as you want to think. Like you can totally sit and think for a second if you want to.
Yeah. I think honestly, I can say that the experienced emotion is obviously fear, and it's a fear of disappointing someone, not even myself, that individual. Yeah, and honestly, Mr. Mushroom actually put it in chat very well. I often feel like I failed people when I say no to them. And when I read that, that is something that, does resonate with me as well. Like I I failed to do something. Or I failed them specifically, which is obviously never a good emotion experience.
So, when you say no to somebody, it feels like you are failing in some way.
Yeah, I think that is a good way to phrase it and say it, because it does feel like I'm failing them, and I don't specifically know why that emotion is experienced, but it most certainly is.
Hmm.
Regardless of what I am wanting or trying to do. And even when my husband says no for me, I still experience the same, like I feel like I failed them, but I know also that I need to maintain a boundary for my own sanity. So
Okay.
yeah.
And so when you experience other people saying no, either to you or to other people, does any kind of I just realized that your mug flips people off every time you take a drink.
Yes.
That's
Yeah. I just kind of grabbed a mug as I was going out and like, oh well, this will be funny.
that's
Alrighty then.
that's really funny. Do you experience any sort of like similar feelings when other people say no, either to you or to others?
To me specifically, if someone says no to me, I don't even bat an eyelash. It doesn't impact me in nearly the same way as if I were to say it or what have you.
Sure.
Um, it, I'm trying to think of any situation in which no, I mean other unless of course someone's being blatantly mean or rude or any other type of way that is saying no in a way that is at the detriment of the person asking the ask is something possible, um not going to impact the other person much, but maybe it'll impact the person asking a lot more. It's something like that that will evoke more
Like judgment.
anger,
Yeah.
judgments, anger of just like or maybe I can do something, if I could, or if there is if I'm right there in front of me versus on a video or something. But other than that, no, that's really about it.
And so, okay, so I think that's an interesting piece because it sounds like that usually doesn't come up with others unless you feel like, oh well, like they could totally do this. They could totally help someone out, and it wouldn't really have that much of an impact on them, but by them saying no, it has a huge impact on the other person. And so
Yeah.
I think that something that sort of stands out to me about that is that uh the sort of like I don't know how to describe this, but the meter or like what measures whether it's going to have an impact on the other person is different than the meter that measures whether or not it's going to have an impact on you. Does that seem accurate?
So yeah, because to me a no is just okay, just let it go, and that's fine. Because I mean, people obviously have their own autonomy, and to me it doesn't even go out of my mind. But like the plurality of every emotion is like, you add that to somebody else, and I don't like being a bystander to unfairness when something that is being unfair doesn't need to be. There's not like a policy, a law, a process, something in the way that impacts it that is just because somebody said no.
Mm-hmm.
That definitely makes goes more towards the angry side reaction.
For sure. And so I'm almost getting what did Fox say?
No one owes me shit. I owe everyone everything. Mentality is like that. Unfortunately, is probably right. A spot on the money.
Interesting.
So
Yeah. So that speaks to me of like the word that comes to mind is like deservingness. That like there's some kind of feeling that you resonate with about like I don't deserve as much as others. Does that resonate with you, or am I off?
I don't think so. Just in reaction to that,
Okay.
it's not a negative reaction. It's just no reaction.
Sure.
It's more like again a plurality of like my mentality, or how I at least consciously think when I think about it, is that no one owes anyone anything.
Hmm.
But you know what I think a better way is that yes, and I don't necessarily owe everyone everything, but if it's something within my power to be able to give, even if it's not within my power, of course I'm gonna, then it's just that I don't have an issue saying no. But even if it's like, at the detriment to my own health, sometimes I'll still say yes.
Yeah.
Again, unless my spouse is there to say no.
Right.
But it is, so there's not like a hard set, it's one way or this way. It just seems to be like it keeps bifurcating into these different areas that it's kind of difficult to put into words. And yeah, I'm not too sure how to phrase it, or how to bring it back home of this thought, or to give a specific answer.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
That's totally okay. So like I think that part of what we're doing right now is sort of like exploring unknown territory, which I'm totally okay with. How do you feel about exploring unknown territory live on stream?
I'm fine with that. I have no issues with that.
Okay.
I've always been an open book, and legitimately, it would be, I feel like it would be great for my own self-discovery, as well as once a week I have it, so that every Friday during lunchtime, I will actually, can you see on camera? You can't if I do that. Haha. My steel tongue drum. Like, legitimately, it is really quite enjoyable just to have it in my lap, just take it up, have my lap, and just kind of play with it, because again, the ADHD and being able to have the tactile senses, and then just mentally check in with myself. So finding out other avenues to check in with myself as well, I think it's great to have.
Cool. So let me see. I bet you were the fixer in your family. Someone rocked the boat and you were put in a position to fix it. Maybe you felt you had to make it right to make everyone else feel better, even if doing so made you feel worse while you were doing so. Does that resonate with you, Doctor?
I can say that it still resonates as today, and it's always like, if I definitely do not enjoy that sense of helplessness or anything, but if I'm able to assist in some way or help, then yes. And if I can't help, then I still will feel bad, but I'll feel worse, and it'll nag at me consciously that I didn't do anything when I could have, or at least tried.
For sure.
I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's where it is.
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit more about the ways in which you had to fix things when you were younger?
Hmm. I can't think of specific instances, but it's always been that I don't know at what point it happened, but I always became the mediator between everyone.
Hmm.
If there was an issue going on, and more often than not, it wasn't that I was seeking it out. It was somebody would say, like, oh, would know that. Again, being a kid, I don't know what term it was used, but obviously didn't know mediator. But
That
I'd always be the mediator,
you'd be like sort
and
of put in that position.
yeah, and I just kind of, again, trying to be the people pleaser and everything because to make friends faster, I just went with it, and then I think it's probably just stuck with me up to this point.
Yeah.
Um,
What was
yeah.
the sort of primordial place in which you were the mediator? Like where was the main place that you were made to be the mediator?
Oh, that was pretty much always at school or with friends and that sort of thing. It was never with my own family because I am very, very grateful that my parents had, as every couple does, have their own issues. But as a kid, other than one time, and the reason why I can remember that one time is because if it only ever happened once, it's kind of stuck to memory. But where they were able to keep that separate from their interactions with me.
Hmm.
So I never really had to worry about that,
Nice.
which is very quite as an adult is freaking impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
uh, but other than that, yeah, it was always just from when I was a kid. It was always at school and friends and everything.
Gotcha. Yeah, so 99% of the time your parents were able to sort of like keep their own sort of strife away from you, but at school again, sort of coming back to like moving around constantly sort of like making new friends, you were always the person that sort of like made peace in the friend group.
Pretty much always. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if maybe what occurred is that I early on found being I stumbled upon being a mediator and was able to mediate, and I saw the results of it, and that it was brought, it continued the friendship or helped make friends or what have you, and then I tried it again later, and then it just kind of went from there and became part of even today.
Yeah. And so what would happen if you didn't make peace in your friend group?
Then if I didn't, I mean, there were times where, it's like, oh, stop butting in or nosing in or something like that, in which, obviously felt bad, but then just remain quiet. And I mean, that was the worst of it. But it never really, to the best of my knowledge and memory, it never went anywhere else besides that.
Sure. So then I'm curious, earlier you had talked about a fear that like what sort of what I'm sort of imagining, and let me know if this is off, but what I'm sort of imagining is that there's almost this fear of like if I don't mediate, if I don't sort of like make peace, then something bad might happen.
I mean, I cannot think of anything specific. I think with me, with the immediate, it's a fear of failing to help
Hmm.
rather than a fear of internally or the fear of an outcome or anything like that.
Okay.
To me, it's just a fear of, yeah, just doing what was it? Fear of not doing something. What is that? One of the quotes that has always resonated with me, and of course now trying to think of it, of course it's gone. But it is that quote for of all things from World War I think it was. No, it was during World War II. Um, a famous saying, especially when the Jewish individuals were being persecuted and genocide.
Yeah.
And the people that watched it, I mean, if I don't look it up, it's going to bother me. I'm sorry, just like grinding this to a halt.
No. Go for it.
Oh, don't mind the pups.
You're all
One
good.
of the pups. If I can find it. Well, essentially, while I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, and I'm not finding it that quickly, and I'm sure I'll remember it right after we finish, is essentially that those that see atrocities and do nothing are as horrible as the people that committed those atrocities. And that's not the saying, of course, but I can't remember.
Yeah.
But essentially, that's obviously a very, very black and white way looking at it, at everything. But that is legitimately of where my mentality is with. If I see something going on, and I know I have the ability to do something, if I don't do it, then I'm going to, as a fear of not being able to do something and bugging at my own, something like an idea in my own head or my own inner monologue of saying you should have done something or you should have at least tried.
Yeah.
Because I don't have a fear of failing. I just have more of a fear of not doing something.
Yeah. Like if you try to help and you fail, that's actually totally okay. It's that if someone asks for your help and you say no when you could have given it, that is a mortal sin.
Pretty much. I think that is a good way of succinctly describing that weird navigating trail from earlier. But yeah, no, I think that is spot on of just, yeah. So, I'm going to try, I'm taking a look at what's the recording marker because I want to remember it for the future.
Cool. Yeah. So that part totally makes sense to me. This idea that if I have the opportunity to help, even at my own expense, then I am sort of like being a bad person in that moment. I guess what I'm really curious about is that sort of like black and whiteness that you described. I think that oftentimes that black and whiteness is caused by is sort of polarized by some experiences or experience, and that piece still feels missing to me. The piece of like, where did you learn that if you don't help, it makes you like a bad person in that moment?
Yeah. And Mr. Mushroom, you gave me the keys terms, and I swear I heard everything you said. It helps if I focus on two things at once.
Yeah.
As long as the other thing that I'm trying to do is not more taxing than listening.
Sure.
But here's the full quote. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for a good man to do nothing. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's basically where it came from.
For sure. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. Where do you think that you learned that?
I had a lot of Jewish friends growing up in New York. There was a couple of them that of their grandmothers and I say grandmothers because the grandfathers generally those that had that as a placard in their house. The grandfathers generally weren't around because they did not survive the Holocaust. So seeing that placard, it really did resonate with me. I'm guessing at the time, again, being the one trying to always help, probably resonated more with me than it would at around now, potentially. I don't know. Sure. But I know for sure that's how I learned of it is because of the growing up with a lot of Jewish friends and being in and I'm not Jewish myself, neither is my family, but yeah.
So I am Jewish in that my mother was Jewish, so I'm Jewish. I'm not like I'm not practicing, but I know from my own personal experience that in Jewish culture, there can sometimes be a lot of like guilt involved. That you
Yes.
know like Jewish mothers are famous for guilting their children. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious, like in growing up with a lot of Jewish friends, like did you ever experience any kind of like guilt from your friends or anything like that, where if you said no, they made you feel bad about it, that like you weren't, you were sort of like
Mm,
letting evil triumph.
Not to the best of my knowledge, from what I can remember, no.
Okay.
It never really came to that. But unfortunately, the other thing though too is that it it may have, and maybe I don't recall,
Sure.
because if I was moving every 2 to 5 years, there's a lot. There is a lot of reestablishing, um and I don't know if you or anybody else knows, but in New York, there's a very large Jewish population, and business owners. And what was it? You always go to uh, a Jewish deli, because I mean that's where you always wanted, if you wanted to make sure you got a fresh dill pickle and a good good sandwich. Was where you always would go. So, which was great because there was so many different nationalities, and so I had a lot of like friends from all over the world and different religions and beliefs and everything. It was always interesting, but there was definitely a large Jewish population. So that's why I can only think in my mind of like why I would see that placard several times, and I remember specifically one being on the wall of somebody's house.
Yeah. And you said that when you saw it, it resonated with you. Do you think that by that time that that was already very much sort of ingrained with you, and it was just something that you were like, yeah, like that's what I've always thought? Or was it like you saw that and you were like, oh shit, like I guess I really need to make sure that I step it up.
Thinking back on it, it's very vague
Okay.
for the first time that I remember seeing it, but I'm pretty sure it was reaffirmant of what I was already doing.
Okay.
Not necessarily a groundbreaking. It was just like, oh, I'm already okay, good. Then keep doing what you're doing as much as you can, sort of situation, and go from there.
Yeah. Hmm. It's interesting. I feel like there's a missing puzzle piece here. Just something that, and I don't know if that resonates at all with you, doctor. Like I have a very clear understanding of like the symptom, which is like, when I say no, it feels like I am letting evil triumph. But I don't have a good understanding of the cause.
I think the other thing that potentially, and the reason why, so the information that I'm able to actually recall from my childhood is very limited because most of it is actually blocked out. I can't remember a lot of things because I was severely bullied. No matter where I went, I was severely bullied.
Ah.
And so that is probably the missing piece,
Yeah.
that because there's a mentality of a block of it, it's something that I don't actively think about. I don't have an issue obviously now thinking back on it, but it's something that I think, it's something that I didn't want, my brain doesn't want to automatically pull up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that's probably the missing piece right there.
I think that you're absolutely right, doctor. That makes a lot of sense to me. That like if you were severely bullied when you were younger to the extent that your mind literally blocked parts of it out,
Yeah.
it makes a whole lot of sense to me that this idea of letting evil triumph is just the absolute like biggest sin that you could commit, because like with what you went through, it just makes so much sense to me of like I'll be damned if I'm gonna let that kind of thing happen to anybody else ever.
I would 100% agree with that, because that is the one thing still to this day, that if there's the saying no sort of situation when you can actually help, I guess to me would be more qualified as in being mean for no reason, i.e. bullying, and at least in my mind sort of situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That sort of solves it for me. That makes a lot of sense to me. That uh how do I want to say this? Yeah, I think that there's like a feeling of sadness that comes up for me when I think about that. That, you know, in that you got bullied so much that eh, I think sadness and admiration. You got bullied so much that you sort of resolved to like become a hero.
Hopefully without the hero complex, but I'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess, yeah. I mean, it would logically make sense,
Does it
and
does it emotionally resonate for you at all?
mm, to
Totally okay to say
me,
no.
to be honestly, no, it doesn't necessarily feel like being a hero, and it's gonna make it sound like It's almost in my mind the way that it's being phrased is almost like it's trying, not trying, but some others might say being modest potentially, but to me it's not being a hero if you are just doing the basic human decency of being a kind person sort of situation.
Yeah. I think that what makes the difference to me is the sacrifice. That, you know, I think that you're right that there's like a certain level of kindness that is just like being a basic like, you know, decent human being. But what separates you from that for me is that you are actually willing to sacrifice yourself to a certain extent in order to be kind or help people.
Yeah, I can see it. And to be fair, I think that you're probably on the right direction because and you're spot on because my first reaction is to be uncomfortable with that. And because I know for me personally, it's just, and I don't know about others, but I can say if it's uncomfortable, it's probably more likely to be, in this terminology, at least within this area, is that if it's uncomfortable, you're probably on the right track of some of the mental ideas or mental blocks or what have you.
Yep. I think that's very well said. A phrase that I often use is that like growth is all about leaning into discomfort. Um,
Yeah.
and like I think a good analogy for it is like, you know, in video games how when you're sort of when you're finding a lot of bad guys, you know you're going in the right direction. I think it's very similar when you're doing any kind of mental health work, that when you start to feel a lot of discomfort, you're probably headed in a good direction.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, like, for me personally, I know for me, again, and it sounds like from how you describe, but for me, especially even when I am mentally checking in with myself and doing just essentially meditation,
Yeah,
if it's uncomfortable, I want to focus on it more because that's something that should be delved more into.
for sure. So
So,
I'm curious, as we talk about this, can you tell me a little bit more about the discomfort that is coming up?
mm, discomfort in terms of not thinking I'm a hero at the same time trying to not that sounds almost pompous to me to call that a hero complex, and not odd for you to call it, but for if I were to internally call it myself in that terminology, that I would feel like that feels like you're being pompous. Like all I need to now is pontificate. Um, and besides that, I don't know if I can explain it more into emotions beyond that. That's the closest I can get to it. I can think of, at least off the top of my head, trying to describe it now.
Yeah, that makes sense. If I call myself a hero, like it feels conceited. Like I don't want to
Yes.
I don't want to think of myself as a hero. That's ugh, it's cringe.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Like it's like I don't know. Like, but no, it is. To me, it's like it could potentially also be that in my mind it is a how to phrase it, um that if maybe somewhere subconsciously, if I have a definition of what a good person is, that if that's not the standard or expected definition, then it's uncomfortable to have to redefine potentially. I'm not too sure. That's kind of, I feel like there's a little twinge of that.
Yeah,
Maybe.
that sounds this is a strange phrase, but that sounds juicy to me. Um, what is that standard?
The standard, if I have to boil it, if I could, if I boil it down to just the basics of it, is that a good person, trying to think of non-medical terminology, but honestly, like almost like the Hippocratic Oath, which ironically, the Hippocratic Oath is translation is actually off and poor and not correct. But what it actually is saying is to do the least amount of harm as possible when you are trying to help. So, because I mean, obviously, if you're doing, if someone is being operated on, you're hurting. Well, anesthetic, hopefully, knock on wood, completely out, and they don't feel it. But you are causing harm to the body.
Yeah.
But you're doing it for a
greater good,
for the better goal in the end.
Yeah.
And so kind of similar to that, of course, nowhere near as like insane level of what surgery is,
Sure.
but just like even small random acts of kindness or doing, whatever you were trying to do good, try to make sure that the consequences, positive and negative consequences, do not offset what you're trying to accomplish. If that makes sense.
I think so. Yeah, and it sounds really hard, Doctor, because how do I want to say this? Something
Welcome
that
to ethics.
it is very ethical. That like
Yeah.
something that sounds a little bleak, but I think is true, is that like as humans, us existing like causes harm.
Yes.
And so
we are, by definition, we are parasites.
Yeah, and so then like having to live your life in this way of like, well, I have to sort of the interpretation that I'm sort of getting is, and let me know if it's off, is that like I have to constantly be thinking about how to minimize that as much as humanly possible.
I think that is pretty spot on. I think because I've been doing it for so long, it doesn't really give me a pause or of thought.
It's just instinctual now.
Yeah, now it's just instinctual. And the other thing, though, too, is that I also completely acknowledge I cannot know everything. I am not omnipotent or omnipresent. I can only go with the information I have. Like the same reason, I almost feel like it is. I have done triage before many times with different events, and it's not like, oh God, like you see on Grey's Anatomy or something, where there's triage and everybody's like, no, I mean, as in literally, when you have health events, you have to triage, and you just have to be able to go with the limited amount of information with what you have, especially if you have like, especially it was like 3-day events and you have several thousand people, you have to triage like, okay, who are the ones that unfortunately they have. It might be a little bit difficult, but they have the money and that their issues are low priority.
Mm-hmm.
Like we'll try. And then you go, medium priority, high priority, and what are the impacts and that sort of thing, not only to them, but also if they don't get it done, how does that impact if they have a family? How does that impact their ability to get work and that sort of thing? And so you're always juggling those ideas.
Yeah.
And so it's the same line of triage within probably a better word, but triaging in my own mind of what actions will be. If I do this, then what are, from what I understand, what are some of the consequences? If it gets really difficult, I legitimately would like actually start writing it out, or what can I live with, if I do something, if I don't. And of course, again, if somebody's asking me to do something and it seems very simple, that's why I do want to say yes as well, because it's something I can do that, like, oh, that'll be beneficial, but it won't but then in my own mind of triaging, I never put in my own physical health into that as well. I don't know why. I know I don't do it, but I still at the time will never do it. So
Yeah, and so like as you talk about that, the word that comes to mind is exhausting. Like triaging seems like such a sort of like mentally and I don't know the right word, like morally taxing event. And the idea of constantly doing that in my own mind, like I get exhausted just thinking about it. What is that like for you?
to me, I feel like it also became an ADHD coping mechanism because always doing more than one thing at the same time is honestly is what helps keep me on track.
Gotcha.
So I feel like uh, um, because of being able to never just sit and relax, and it took, I'm sure, many years as far as I can think of, but at least I know when it's time for bed, at least without even thinking about it now, it's turned off. It's just okay, it's time for bed
Wow.
because otherwise I will not sleep. And there are times where every once in a while, like maybe every 6 months, maybe a little more, I cannot turn it off. And then for whatever reason, I don't know why or what I've done differently. And then I literally don't sleep that night. Or if I'm lucky, I maybe get 2 hours.
How do you do that? How do you just turn your mind off like that?
Um, I go into I don't know if it's considered a meditative state, but essentially what I do is I will lay either on my side or on my back and just close my eyes, and I don't allow myself to control my line of thought. I let it go rampant wherever it wants to go, it's going to go.
Mhm.
But when I take away the ability to actually, navigate my own thoughts and saying like, no, 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 then this, then this, and this, it's just turn it off, and then just allow it to go wherever it wants to go, and just relax. And with me letting go of control, is just slip into unconsciousness. And as Mr. Mushroom says, to be honest, I find it super easy to turn my mind off. And I mean, I think for me, it's something as well. It's super easy, but even I still don't understand why once in a great while I can't. There's not a food eaten, not a dietary issue, not a major issue. Um, I haven't figured it out yet. I haven't found a repeating pattern or some sort of potential cause. But I think Mr. Mushroom, to be fair, at least for myself, when I was probably in my 20s, I used to have very bad sleep. I think it probably helped that worked two job. I was in two different master's programs, so about 6 years, renovating the house while we were still married, and I had a full-time job, and I taught on the side. So I think like I rarely got sleep anyway.
Sure.
So I didn't have to worry about it. But now, like graduated, it's like, oh, like turn it off.
Wow, yeah. And it sounds like it's almost as if you turn off the triage and not necessarily the thoughts themselves. That the thoughts keep running, but
Oh yeah.
in turning off the triage, it allows you to it's almost like you're like I don't know, like watching a movie or, like listening to something before you go to bed. It's just like, yeah, like I'm just sort of watching a picture show and it's going to do what it's going to do and I'm gonna fall asleep to it. Versus
Yep.
like normally where it's this like constant like compartmentalizing of like, okay, I gotta put this here, this here, this here, this here, etc.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, that's exactly what it is, and that is the best way I've ever had it described. Because it's I remember the first time trying to learn how to meditate, and I was like, how does anybody freaking control their thoughts? Like, this is like incredibly difficult. And I thought for like years that like, oh, it's like there's no way. It's like trying to ask somebody with ADHD to meditate and focus on the one thought. Like that is not. I don't know anybody that can really do that. I'm sure there's probably are, but that's just in my mind what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I spoke to someone that did Reiki. I had a friend that was very, very spiritual, and so she convinced me to go to a Reiki school just for the students to practice,
Mm.
and it just kind of came up with one of the instructors one day, and I was like, oh, like just like you don't have to focus on one thought. Some people can do that, but for the meditative is to essentially, as you said, to be succinct about it, is just view it as you are outside of your own body sort of situation where you are just viewing it as a video or an outside observer, and you basically don't react to it. You just let it go through, and it is kind of like watching a YouTube video and just going to sleep. It's just like, okay.
Yeah. Honestly, Doctor, I think that that is a really, really valuable skill that you're sort of sharing with everybody right now, because I think that it is very, very common, just like you experience, that a lot of people think that in order to sort of like meditate successfully, they have to clear their mind. And every time they don't clear their mind, that they're sort of like failing to meditate.
Yep.
And what I really heard you do is like you changed the relationship with your thoughts rather than trying to sort of like fight against them. You were like, I'm just gonna sort of like sit on the side of the road and like watch the cars go by.
Yeah.
And in that,
That's
go ahead.
no. I mean, that's basically it. And I could say how it started with is even just at work. If there was something really bother me, or sometimes I don't know, I know some people experience it, and I would love to know, be those people that don't experience it, but where you are doing something completely different, and then something that you were embarrassed by or that annoyed you from when you were like 10 pops in your head.
Hmm.
You're like, what? Like, I wasn't even thinking about that, it just popped on in, and so it would always, like, I used to always cringe at it, like, oh god, why? Like, and then when it would happen, instead of like trying to force my mind away from it, even to still what I'll do today at least, but what started it all was just like, okay, take a step back, just let it play out, don't react, just let it play out, and then it would play out and be like, all right, moving on. And
Yeah.
so that's what started it, at least.
Yeah, I think that that's really, really powerful. What you're talking about, that you have developed the skill of sort of distancing yourself from your thoughts.
Yeah, it's almost like while it is a negative term more often than not, compartmentalizing and disassociating.
Hmm.
But that's what I have to do in order to go to sleep. So but it also seems to work very well for a meditative approach as well.
Yeah. And so, coming back to this sort of idea of like uh, living your waking life as sort of like a triage, I'm curious, like, is there a desire to change that, or do you like it that way?
Personally, I like it that way,
For sure.
because to me, to try to do the most amount of good with the least amount of harm is always something that I value
Hmm.
about myself. That I not, oh, I'm better than anybody else. It's just for me,
Something
it's
that
how I'm
you
able
take
to live with
personal
myself.
pride in.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
And that's why I mean, to me, it doesn't. It takes absolutely no additional. It has think as of today, at least I can say, or within recent history, personal history, there doesn't seem to be a negative benefit, excuse me, a negative effect, aside from every once in a while have insomnia. And that one, again, triage, that one bit of insomnia versus how I am able to be happy with my life and how I react and engage with others way exceeds one sleepless night every 6 months or so.
Yeah, it's like very much worth the sacrifice.
Exactly. So I was like, I'm happy with it.
For sure. Yeah. And so then, with that in mind, I'm sort of curious, like, if you had to sort of like rate your happiness on a scale of like 1 to 10, 1 being I'm miserable, I'm depressed, 10 being like I'm super happy with my life, where would you rate it?
I always feel like not too sure with Likert and things like that. I mean, I can answer your question as in with the trajectory of my life, where I am currently, and with the support structure of those around me and that I value,
Hmm.
I would have to say that's obviously at a 10.
Okay.
There are many, many things that, little things I would love to be able to change here and there. I.e., like starting from the beginning, when we were first talking with my spouse, you're like, oh, I wish I could lose the weight again, which, slowly make my way to it. I would love to be able to finish my vegetable garden fully, or, have a couple less bills and stuff like that, where it's just like, but in the grand scheme of things, where I'm at currently, yes, life could always get better,
Hmm.
but with everything that I have around me, I am satisfied.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Honestly, doctor, I think it sounds like a very woke place to be. That I have like peace, contentment, and satisfaction, and I also am like open and willing and excited about continuing to grow and improve.
I would agree with that one, and because I always do want to. There is always room for improvement, and always a way to learn new skills, new items, new ways, and that's why even like I was offered to do this here is because I figured this would be a good way to discuss. Again, feeling that sense of uncomfortable. It's like, oh, I would not have experienced that without this. So it's always nice to experience new things and grow. But for right now, yes, absolutely content.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm feeling really good. Like I feel like I poked around in a few places and like found honestly, doctor, a lot of richness, I think. I think that the way that you have crafted your life and the way that you navigate your life sounds very sort of like aware and intentional. And I'm very like proud and impressed. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, yeah. So, is there anything else that you'd like to touch on before we sort of wrap up here?
um, let's see. Well, going back to that, always wanting to do good or what have you. I'm not too sure how to summarize it.
Mhm.
Is there anything else that we could discuss, or a way that you can think of me currently for me to help you in the future?
To help me in the future?
Yeah, with a more of either these open discussions, seeing there's maybe other individuals that would might be interested in it. I'd always be able to reach out and ask, or to help you and your community.
I'm always down if you feel like there are people that the to sort of clue you and everyone who's watching in on the reason why I do this is that I think that a huge majority of the problems that we experience in today's world have an underlying root of ignorance. That if people were like more educated, if people understood things better, that they could that we could make the world a better place. And so the idea of these is to sort of like help to just sort of like spread and raise awareness about mental health, just sort of like educate about mental health, whether that is through a more sort of like academic conversation or whether it's through a more sort of explorative conversation. So anybody that you feel like could contribute to that in either way, whether it's like, oh, like I think that this person could really benefit from talking to you, or oh, I think that this person could, like contribute a lot to sort of like an educational conversation. I would love for you to send them my way.
Sure.
Yeah. And then was there another part to your question, or did I get it?
I think that was for the most part because it was these discussions as well as any way to assist your community. But I believe just further discussions and that would probably help. I'd imagine.
For sure, yeah. And then I mean, like honestly, doctor, if there's one thing that I might be able to offer you of value, I think it's that, and I think that I'm assuming a little bit, so please let me know if I am.
Okay.
But that I think that you have inherent value without doing anything. That
Oh,
just your sort of like presence actually does help my community. So I honestly just really appreciate your presence.
uh, thank you. I'm not too sure what to say that one other than thank you, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm not going too red, since it's always I always feel like, well, I'm just trying to do good essentially, as we've discussed. So I'll just say thank you.
Yeah, yeah. If I can offer one thing to sort of like take away from this conversation is like to think a little bit about this idea of inherent value, of like, what is my value in the world if I don't do anything? What, like, just with I don't know how else to say it other than that. Does that make sense?
Understand that one. My immediate reaction is, oh God.
Yep.
Just
Yep. There's the bad guys in the video game, right? Popping up
yeah,
left and
yeah.
right.
Yeah, I was like, oh God, oh no, I like just not being able to. Yeah, for me, it was just like, oh,
I hate
scary.
that. Totally. All right. So, would you like to like plug anything, or like give any sort of, like tell people where to find you, anything like that?
No, I mean I'm good. I'm sure I'll be stopping on by. Anybody that wants to hop on over, more than welcome. But I only stream Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and after work. And I only stream for a shorter amount of time, just more because again the balance of everything that goes on. But otherwise, if I see anybody, awesome. If I don't, no worries either.
Cool, cool. And then for me, I'll just say real quick that, like I said, my name is Sean Tech. I'm a mental health coach for my day job. So discussions that are somewhat similar to these, I have with about 35 clients a week. And so if that's something that you're interested in, feel free to check it out. And then, like for those of you that eventually watch this on YouTube or whatever, like, subscribe, all that cheesy, YouTubey stuff. And thanks for watching.